In the summer of 1915, as Europe teetered on the edge of the Great War, a baby girl was born in Stockholm who would one day captivate the world with her luminous presence. But Ingrid Bergman's story begins not with triumph, but with profound loss that would shape every decision she made for the rest of her life. At just 3 years old, little Ingrid watched helplessly as her mother succumbed to illness, leaving behind a bewildered child who barely understood the concept of forever. The house that had once echoed with laughter and lullabies suddenly fell silent, and Ingrid found herself clinging to the only parent she had left, her father Justus, a photographer whose gentle hands could capture light itself. For 9 precious years, father and daughter existed in their own magical world. Justus would take Ingrid into his dark room, where she watched in wonder as images emerged from nothingness in chemical baths. He taught her that pictures could tell stories without words, that a single frame could hold an entire universe of emotion. But fate had not finished with its cruel lessons. When Ingrid was 12, the unthinkable happened again. Her beloved father, the man who had been her anchor in a world of uncertainty, suddenly collapsed and died, leaving her completely orphaned before her 13th birthday. The relatives who took her in were kind but distant, and Ingrid retreated into herself, becoming a ghost of the vibrant child she had once been. It was in the darkness of a Stockholm theater that she first found light again. Watching actors transform into other people, speak words that weren't their own yet felt more real than reality itself. Something awakened in the grieving teenager. Here was magic more powerful than her father's photography. Here was a way to live 1,000 lives, to feel everything without being destroyed by it. Against her relatives' wishes, who thought acting was no profession for a respectable young woman, Ingrid auditioned for the Royal Dramatic Theatre School. The same institution that had shaped Greta Garbo's legendary career would now witness the emergence of another Swedish icon. But even as success began to find her in Swedish films, Ingrid carried within her a hunger that Stockholm couldn't satisfy. She had devoured every Hollywood film that made its way to Sweden, memorizing not just the dialogue but the way American actors moved, the rhythm of their speech, the effortless glamour that seemed as natural as breathing. When producer David Selznick invited her to Hollywood in 1939 to remake her Swedish success Intermezzo, she didn't hesitate for a moment. She arrived in America speaking broken English, carrying one suitcase and dreams bigger than her homeland could contain. Hollywood in 1939 was a factory of illusion, where studio executives molded actresses like clay, reshaping their names, their faces, their entire identities to fit whatever image would sell tickets. But there was something about Ingrid Bergman that resisted transformation. Her natural beauty needed no enhancement. Her genuine emotion required no coaching. When she appeared opposite Leslie Howard in the American Intermezzo, audiences were stunned by her authenticity in a world of manufactured perfection. Here was a woman who seemed to have stepped out of real life onto the silver screen, bringing with her all the complexity and contradiction that studio bosses usually try to eliminate. The roles that followed reads like a masterclass in screen acting. As Ilsa in Casablanca, she created one of cinema's most tortured characters, a woman torn between duty and desire, between the man she loved and the cause she believed in. Watching her in Rick's Cafe, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the piano, audiences could see her heart breaking in real time. The famous line, "Play it again, Sam," was never actually spoken in the film, but what Bergman did say, "Play it, Sam, play as time goes by," was delivered with such devastating sincerity that it became one of the most quoted moments in film history. But it was her performance in Gaslight that truly revealed the depths of her talent. Playing a woman slowly driven to madness by her manipulative husband, Bergman had to navigate the treacherous waters between sanity and insanity, making the audience believe in both her character's fragility and her underlying strength. The role required her to access her own deepest fears of abandonment and loss, the same feelings that had haunted her since childhood. When she won her first Academy Award for the performance, she held the golden statue with trembling hands, finally understanding that she had found her true home not in any geographical location, but in the art of storytelling itself. Yet success in Hollywood came with a price that Ingrid had never anticipated. The studio system that had made her a star also sought to control every aspect of her life, from the roles she played to the men she dated. She was expected to be America's sweetheart, pure and untouchable, a living representation of moral perfection. But Ingrid Bergman was a woman, not a symbol, and like all women, she longed for love, passion and artistic fulfillment that went beyond the narrow confines of Hollywood expectation. It was this longing that led her to write a fateful letter to Italian director Roberto Rossellini in that she had seen his film Rome, Open City, and been moved by its raw honesty, its unflinching portrayal of life during wartime. "I saw your film and was so impressed," she wrote. "If you ever need a Swedish actress who speaks English very well, has not forgotten her German, can understand French and is trying to learn Italian, I am ready to come and make a film with you." It was meant to be a professional inquiry, but it would become the most consequential letter of her life. When Ingrid arrived in Italy to film Stromboli in 1949, she was still married to Dr. Peter Lindstrom, the neurosurgeon who had been her steady companion since they had built what appeared to be a perfect life together, complete with their daughter Pia. But Ingrid had begun to feel like an actress playing a role even in her own home. Rossellini represented everything her marriage was not: passion instead of stability, artistic revolution instead of comfortable routine, the promise of a life lived at full intensity. The affair that bloomed between director and star was volcanic in its intensity, and catastrophic in its consequences. When news broke that America's beloved Ingrid Bergman was not only having an affair but was pregnant with Rossellini's child, the reaction was swift and brutal. She was denounced on the floor of the United States Senate as a powerful influence for evil, and banned from American screens. The woman who had once been Hollywood royalty became persona non grata overnight, forced into exile not just from the country that had made her famous, but from the entire American film industry. But in choosing love over respectability, Rossellini over Hollywood, Ingrid also chose artistic growth over commercial safety. The films she made with Rossellini, Stromboli, Europa 51 and Journey to Italy, were initially dismissed by critics and ignored by audience. They were too real, too raw, too honest for popular taste. Yet these same films would later be recognized as masterpieces of neo-realist cinema, influencing generations of filmmakers and critics. In sacrificing her immediate career, Ingrid had helped create something eternal. The marriage to Rossellini produced 3 children but lasted only 8 years. By 1957, the passion that had burned so brightly had consumed itself, leaving behind ashes and memories. Ingrid found herself alone once again, but this time with a different. She was no longer the naive young woman who had arrived in Hollywood nearly 2 decades earlier. She had loved deeply, suffered publicly, and emerged from the fire with her talent, not only intact, but refined by experience. It was during this period of personal reconstruction that she encountered Gregory Peck, and their professional relationship revealed something profound about both actors. Years later in her memoir, she would write simply, "He was massive," but those 3 words contained universes of meaning. Peck was not just physically imposing, though at 6 feet 3 inches he towered over most of his contemporaries. It was his moral presence that overwhelmed her, his absolute commitment to integrity both on screen and off. In a business built on pretense, Peck was genuinely himself, and working with him reminded Ingrid of what she had loved about acting in the first place. "You couldn't lie to him," she confessed in her memoir. "He had eyes that saw through you, not in a way that made you feel exposed, but in a way that made you want to be honest." Their scenes together crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with 2 artists pushing each other toward excellence. Peck's presence was so overwhelming that Ingrid admitted to forgetting her lines, not from nervousness, but from being genuinely transported by the man before her. It wasn't attraction in the conventional sense, but rather a recognition of greatness, a surrender to someone who seemed carved from something timeless and enduring. When Hollywood finally welcomed her back with Anastasia, in 1956, awarding her a 2nd Academy Award, it felt like both vindication and new beginning. She had proved that talent could survive scandal, that authentic artistry was more powerful than public opinion. Her 3rd marriage, to Swedish theatrical producer Lars Schmidt in 1958, provided the stability she needed to rebuild her career while maintaining her artistic independence. This union lasted 17 years, longer than her previous 2 marriages combined,
perhaps because it was built on mutual respect rather than desperate passion. The final act of Ingrid's career was marked by her willingness to take on challenging, even controversial roles. Her portrayal of Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in A Woman Called Golda required her to transform not just physically but emotionally, embodying a woman who had shaped the destiny of nations. By this time, Ingrid was already battling the cancer that would eventually claim her life, but she approached the role with the same fearless commitment that had defined her entire career. The first sign of illness had come in 1974, during her run in The Constant Wife in London. A hard lump under her left breast could have been ignored, rationalized away, but Ingrid had spent too many years running from difficult truths. On June 15, she underwent surgery at a private London clinic, beginning a battle that she would fight with the same courage she had brought to every other challenge in her life. The cancer returned during the filming of Autumn Sonata, forcing her to make desperate trips back to London for treatment between scenes. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Ingrid's final years was not her struggle with illness, but her refusal to let that struggle define her. Even as the disease ravaged her body, collapsing vertebrae and stealing her breath, she continued to work, to create, to give everything she had to her art. The performance in A Woman Called Golda was filmed while she was quite literally dying, yet it remains one of the most powerful and moving portrayals of political leadership ever captured on film. In her final months, confined to her London apartment in Cheney Gardens, Ingrid faced the ultimate performance of her life, the challenge of dying with dignity while the world watched. Paparazzi camped outside her building, hoping to capture one last image of the fading star, but she denied them that final violation of her privacy. Instead, she spent her time reading, particularly The Little Prince, the philosophical fable about love, loss, and the things that truly matter in life. On August 29, 1982, exactly 67 years after her birth, Ingrid Bergman took her final breath. It was just after midnight, and she was surrounded by people who loved her, including her former husband Lars Schmidt, with whom she had maintained a warm friendship despite their divorce. They had shared a final toast in her honor just hours before, a bittersweet celebration of a life fully lit. By her bedside lay the open copy of The Little Prince, perhaps her last quiet meditation on the mysteries of existence. Her memorial service at St. Martin-in-the-Fields drew 1,200 mourners from around the world, but it was her grandson's observation that captured the true magnitude of her loss. Standing amid the chaos of photographers and grieving celebrities, young Justin Daly suddenly realized that his grandmother no longer belonged just to their family. In the middle of all this chaos, he said, "I could sense that she wasn't just my grandmother, she belonged to everyone else. She belonged to the world." This realization speaks to something profound about the nature of true artistry and authentic living. Ingrid Bergman's life was marked by scandal and triumph, by love affairs and broken marriages, by professional heights and personal valleys. She made choices that shocked her contemporaries and paid prices that would have destroyed lesser spirits. But through it all, she remained fundamentally honest, both as an artist and as a human being. She refused to be confined by the expectations of her time, choosing instead to live boldly, love deeply, and create fearlessly. In our current age of manufactured celebrity and social media performance, Ingrid Bergman's story feels both ancient and urgently contemporary. She reminds us that true fame comes not from being perfect but from being authentic, not from avoiding controversy, but from standing by your convictions, not from playing it safe, but from risking everything for what you believe in. Her legacy lives on not just in the film she made, but in the example she set, showing us that it's possible to be both vulnerable and strong, both human and transcendent. The final message of Ingrid Bergman's extraordinary life is perhaps the most important lesson any of us can learn. We are all, in our own ways, performers on the stage of existence, faced with the choice between authenticity and conformity, between living safely and living fully. Ingrid chose fullness over safety, truth over convenience, art over commerce. She paid prices for these choices that few of us would be willing to pay, but she also achieved a kind of immortality that money cannot buy, and fame cannot guarantee. In the end, she belonged not to Sweden or Hollywood or Italy, but to the world, and her light continues to shine for anyone brave enough to seek their own authentic path through the darkness.